Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices, and we are happy to welcome Susannah Petitt back to the program. Susannah, it's been a little while since you and I have talked, but for those who are meeting you for the first time, take a moment, tell us about who you are.
Hi, I'm Susannah. Thanks, Brian, for having me back on. I'm a program manager at an economic research center outside of Washington, D.C., where I work on fiscal and labor policy issues, and I am a social mobility fellow with Young Voices.
And we're going to talk today about homelessness, which I know this is one of those topics that people, we not only don't like to talk about it, but maybe people have experienced. You're going down the street, a homeless person's walking towards you. Oh, I was suddenly struck blind, at least until they were passed, and then my vision returned. I'm trying to be kind about this, but it's a problem people don't like to see, but nonetheless, it's a problem. Talk to me about what's going on in Washington, D.C. to address homelessness, and then let's talk about whether it's a worthwhile or workable solution or not.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the visibility of homelessness is something I talked about in a recent piece I wrote for Greater Washington, which is a urbanist-focused DC area publication. And I wrote the piece after participating in DC's point-in-time count, where you go out and manually survey all of the people sleeping on the street on a random night in January. And I was inspired to write the piece after President Trump made an announcement that all the homeless encampments in DC were going to be cleared. And it's city policy to give residents 14 days, but Mayor Bowser didn't necessarily follow that earlier this year and started clearing encampments with only a day or two's notice for the people living in these areas. And so when we're talking about visibility, destroying encampments does make homeless residents less visible, but it doesn't get rid of the problem of homelessness.
So let's talk about some of the root problems that perhaps could be focused on, as opposed to let's clear all this out of here, out of sight, out of mind. What puts people in that situation in the first place?
It varies. For women, it's frequently domestic violence or sexual violence. But the most common causes of chronic homelessness. So this is people who, it's one thing to one night you don't have a place to stay and you're sleeping in your car, versus people who are routinely in and out of shelters, back on the streets, maybe find a house and then they are evicted again. That's frequently caused by some sort of chronic condition, like an addiction to a substance, mental health problems, especially severe mental health disorders, and then also physical disabilities as well. Being a veteran was a common corroborating factor with homelessness, but veteran homelessness has declined in the U.S., which is worth celebrating. So we see more mental, physical health, and then, of course, domestic violence as well.
You point out in your article that when policymakers are looking at how do we address homelessness, oftentimes they're coming at it from an aesthetic point of view, or look at what this is doing to our city. This is sending a message we don't want to send. But where you have been out there and actually worked with these people, you say it's quite different when you've actually looked the homeless in the face.
Yeah, so I recommend anybody who lives in a city receiving HUD, Housing and Urban Development funding, every city that gets homeless prevention funding has to conduct these point-in-time counts. So it is a set list of survey questions that you ask. It's a big team. I had a maybe 1 mile radius in Northwest DC, and I was with a team of about 12 volunteers. We were broken up into groups of 3. And you go up and you ask these survey questions, but a lot of people experiencing homelessness really just want to tell their story. They want to talk about how they got there. They want to talk about their history. And it was really inspiring to hear how people being in some of the most desolate places can still have hope and look for a future and have plans for a future. Of course, I did run into some people who were clearly under the influence of some sort of substance, but I also ran into people who were talking about their desire that they have worked to become clean from substance abuse. And it's hard because they're living on the streets and they're trying to get into housing or trying to get a job, but the systems just aren't set up to best support them, especially for the chronically homeless who have kind of been deemed a lost cause, versus those people that I mentioned who maybe are one-off, they're escaping some sort of, they just had a life-changing event, whether that's the end of a marriage or the end of a job. But the people who are experiencing routine homelessness are more likely to be left behind. but a lot of them had a lot of hope about their future. And you wouldn't see that if you just see the person, oh, that's my bus stop and there's a homeless person sitting under the enclosure. I don't know if I'll just stand at a distance. Versus even just saying hello and asking how they are can really make a big difference in how we view people experiencing homelessness.
Wow. I admire you for walking the walk, and walking the talk to get out there and see these people face to face. It's interesting too that when it comes to public policy addressing homelessness, making it a legal matter, in some cases a criminal matter, where people can be arrested for unauthorized camping, public camping, and things like that. It just seems like that just adds another layer of complexity as well as difficulty on an already impossible situation.
Right. Yeah. We were talking about Idaho, where they attempted to ban homelessness or ban sleeping on the street, but that's a shelter capacity question. Idaho actually has a really great kind of infrastructure to help people experiencing homelessness. But when shelters are at capacity and someone doesn't have somewhere else to go, the streets are where they want to go. And of course, Idaho isn't the most temperate place. I'm sure people don't necessarily want to be sleeping on the streets in Idaho. But if there isn't a place for a person experiencing homelessness on any given night to be, saying, oh, we're going to put you in jail or we are going to give you a fine really doesn't address the fact that there wasn't somewhere for them to go. A better response would be increasing shelter capacity. And that's a really important role for civil society, whether that be nonprofits or churches, to step in to try and provide more spaces for homeless people to go.
It sounds like that might be one of those areas too where those nonprofits or those non-governmental organizations that would like to help would be helped if the regulatory part of government could step back. I know of, I think it was in Florida, where people were arrested for feeding the homeless. And, so no, that'll encourage more homelessness. And so they arrested the people doing charity.
Yeah, that's very common, that the government, for some reason, doesn't want private charity. And we see that governments, when they give money to charities, they crowd out private donations. They decrease the amount of, if governments are solving a problem, it decreases the amount of charities stepping in. And so it definitely is a space for there to be less government. I think there is a jump by people to say, okay, well, homelessness is growing, we should throw more money at it. But spending on the war on poverty has increased eightfold since it began in the 1960s. So it's clear that something isn't working. And the private charities are able to go and say, I understand the people in my city. The needs of the homeless population in D.C. is different than the needs of the homeless population in New York, and different than the one in San Francisco. So finding local actors can be really valuable in actually helping eradicate homelessness.
Susannah, we're down to about 1 minute, but let's take that minute. I want to go back to something that you had talked about what the homeless really need. It's not always money. It's not always a new government program to look out for them. Let's talk about what it means just for someone to acknowledge, to say hi to them. What does that mean to a person who is on the streets and used to being, invisible from time to time?
Yeah, one of the biggest problems and one of the drivers of chronic homelessness is loneliness, and is feeling kind of like an outsider in society. And so if you are someone who even just smiles or says hello, or I learned while I was on the pit count that especially in colder places, hand warmers are like a very valuable commodity. If you hand that to a person experiencing homelessness, you could be the bright spot in their day. Maybe you won't be the reason they stop using drugs or the reason they go and they find a shelter, but you can still play a valuable part in making them feel like a part of the community, which is a necessary first step, especially for those experiencing chronic homelessness.
I love it. Again, we're talking with Susannah Petitt. She's a social mobility fellow with Young Voices and also an economic policy program manager in D.C. Where can people find you on social media? Where can they follow your work?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Susannah Petitt, and I have a Substack, which is theupwardbound.substack.com, where I write on social mobility, family, and gender policy issues.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we're happy to welcome Brayden Myers to the program. This is his first time on Moving Forward. Brayden, take a few moments here to tell us about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you. It's a real privilege to be here. I'm excited to talk with you. So my name's Brayden Myers. I'm currently a student at the University of Alabama, where I study economics, philosophy, and history. I'm interested in political philosophy and tax policy. I'm fans of those. What I'm not usually a fan of are film festivals, actually. But I saw in the news the other day that the Ghost of Adam Smith was going to have a feature as part of a short TV series in the Edinburgh Film Festival. Now, I was absolutely appalled by this news, because if the Ghost of Adam Smith is available, I would much rather have him commentating on U.S. tax policy. But that's what I'm here to talk with you about today instead.
Yeah, and what a great lead up to our topic. The big, beautiful bill that the president was so insistent be delivered to him by July 4th so he could sign it. It is a big bill. Beautiful, I'll let that be in the eye of the beholder, but there are a lot of provisions in there that I really hadn't heard about. And when I saw your article, that's the first time I had ever really heard about the 1% tax on international remittances. Now, that's a word that I don't know a lot of people are using daily, but when we talk about a remittance, an international remittance, what does that refer to?
Yes, so an international remittance is when someone is working in one country and then sends money typically back to their country of origin. So remittances are an $818 billion global industry. Of that, about 200 billion come from the United States. So we make up about a quarter of the money that is flowing from workers in the United States to these places abroad. For reference, the combined total of foreign aid from every country in the OECD was about 227 billion. So these are large amounts of money we're talking about here that are having a big impact on people's lives.
Now, I'm sure those who are selling such a tax, but it's only 1%. I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but let's just back up to the 20,000 foot level and talk about what is the message sent when any government seeks to tax money that is being sent to another country for, supporting one's family. It seems like there's a message of some sort being communicated there by the country that's taxing.
Absolutely. The message we're sending is that your money isn't yours. The entirety of a market interaction is based around the premise that if I am paying you to work for me, that is because your work is worth more to me than my money is. And likewise, my money is worth more to you than your labor is. And when we're imposing a tax on what people do with that money, we are not actually discouraging the behaviors we want to discourage. What we are doing is sending a message that we are going to use our tax policy to try to influence things that are completely outside of revenue or the government's responsibility.
And Brayden, talk to me about the idea that money being sent out of country, someone comes here, earns it, and then sends it, say, home to Mexico or wherever they had come here from. What's the theory that makes that so distasteful to some people? If that money goes out of the U.S., presumably it's not useful to our economy?
That's the idea, yes. So if you can picture a big old American dragon sitting on top of a big pile of coins, that's based around the idea of what we call mercantilism. And what that is the idea that it is the monies, the gold and silver that we have as a nation that defines our wealth. And Adam Smith's argument was that this just isn't true. Money is the flowing energy through the global economy. But frankly, having a huge supply of paper money doesn't do anything unless you have a nation full of origami enthusiasts. It's not useful, and It stops the flow of trade, which can allow us to acquire the goods that we want, the services we want, and can all around make life better for people.
It's something you point out in your article too, is the idea that policies like this suggest that your right to property doesn't depend on how you earned it, but just on how you use it, which again, that's an area I don't want to be gray. I'd like that to be a little more black and white as to where government should keep its hands off.
Absolutely. Wouldn't we all? But it's most certainly a bridge too far. There's a legitimate claim, arguably everywhere, that the government has a right to what it supports, right? It has a right to income, property, whatnot. But when we are imposing a tax on the least advantaged members of society, right? We aren't targeting hedge funds here. We are targeting money being sent abroad, averaging about $250 a trip. When we are targeting that, we are sending a message that we are going to attack the weak, the meek, and those most in need.
Well, and as you had pointed out earlier in the article, the money that is leaving this country when someone comes here and earns it, it's not like they've come here and they are plundering some irreplaceable resource and, they're just stripping the country bare and sending it all off. They're coming here, and I know that you could explain this better. The people don't just live outside of our system. They have to buy groceries, they have to buy gas, they have to have dental checkups and so forth. In other words, they're some of that wherewithal stays here, but the part that doesn't, it's not like they're sending it to some faraway dictator or king. They're sending it to family.
Yes, absolutely. They are sending it to family who has an extremely high propensity to spend it then. They're sending it to families in need because, again, often they've sent a family member here to work to earn that money so they can support that family. When they send that money, they are sending it to people who are going to be spending it on needs. And America has a globalized economy. We profit and we serve the entire world. And when we are cutting off money supply to the rest of the world, we're making life worse for a lot of people and frankly not helping that many out.
There's an Adam Smith quote that you use in this article that is a great place to tie this all together. Do you have that quote in front of me? And if you don't, would you mind if I share it?
Please go ahead. I think I've got a couple of Adam Smith quotes.
Okay, this is the last paragraph of the article. Adam Smith wrote that little else is requisite to carry a state to the highest degree of opulence but peace, easy taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice. And you make the case in this article on all three of those counts. This remittance tax fails.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is, first of all, a poor tax, as shown by many sources, including the budget office itself. This is expected to be an ineffective tax that isn't going to collect the amount they respect. It doesn't encourage peace, as I think it's Bastiat says, when money doesn't cross borders, armies do. And when we cut off that flow, we are too encouraging much more aggressive action because people in need seek out what they need, may that be by violence or otherwise. And finally, as an administration of justice, this is a specified carve out for people who are earning money honestly for work in their nation. It is attacking them. And that's not justice any way you slice it.
Well, and in the end, it's attacking their ultimate use of that money, especially when it's being sent abroad, to benefit families. You put it in your article. A government secure in its liberty and confident in its citizens doesn't tax generosity. Well said.
It most certainly does not.
Again, we are talking with Brayden Myers. He is a Young Voices contributor and a student of economics at University of Alabama. Brayden, for people who want to follow your work or would like to connect with you on social media, what's the best way to find you?
I think LinkedIn's the best way to find me at this point. I haven't quite moved on to Twitter or Substack yet, but if I do, that'll be put out on my LinkedIn first.
Okay, so we'll watch for you on LinkedIn. Thanks again for being on the program. I look forward to our next conversation.
All right, thank you so much for having me.
And we are back on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Ethan Watson is joining me. Ethan, you've been a guest on this program a number of times, but for the sake of people meeting you for the very first time, tell us about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I'm a writer for the Young Voices program. I am also going to be an O'Connor Scholar at Arizona State University School of Law starting this fall. And I have a real interest in politics, government, business, culture war issues, and everything in between.
Very good. Well, let's talk about an article that you had published in USA Today about Trump built the GOP into a big tent, but conservatives now threaten to tear it down. By the way, I agree. One of the most remarkable things about Trump's election last year was the coalition of people that he brought together. I mean, the Elon Musks and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s and Tulsi Gabbards, to name a few. Talk to me about how Trump enlarged that big tent of the GOP.
Yeah, well, the Democratic Party and the far left has been kind of acting crazy lately. They've been putting boys in girls' sports. They've been saying that unrestricted abortion is a virtue that should be celebrated. They've really been taking the 20 side of the 80-20 issues. And so that left a lot of people from Joe Rogan to RFK Jr. left out of the Democrat Party they thought they were a part of. President Trump was able to welcome those people in with open arms. And that was really our strength as a GOP, because President Trump is not a particularly ideological person. He likes to win and he likes to be praised. So lots of times he'll change his policy prescriptions based on what people are telling him, which is pretty good when you're looking for someone to be a vessel for policy, right? We're not worshiping the man. We're idolizing these conservative principles, and we like the man because he seems like he can put those into practice. So all those voices was really good and a real strength of the Republican Party. And I loved watching the anti-war Tulsi fans kind of clashing with the tech right, clashing with the Maha moms, and working together on these issues. So it's really remarkable, I thought.
So what has happened now within the GOP that we see threats to tear that big tent down? Where is that division coming from?
Well, we've got this new faction that I'm just going to call the Trump loyalists that have kind of emerged. And like I just talked about, the problem with being a Trump loyalist is there's not like a set of policies that are Donald Trump policies, right? He changes his policies. He slaps a tariff on people, then he backs off them. He criticizes war in the Middle East, and then he bombs Iran. He says he wants to make nice with Putin, but now he's kind of turning on Putin. If your policy prescriptions are all just whatever Trump wants, that's not very consistent, and it seems like there's a lack of critical thinking happening. And so I really noticed this with those strikes on the Fordo nuclear plant in Iran, because I, as someone who kind of tends towards the anti-war, anti-foreign intervention side of things, I thought, well, this doesn't seem like America first. We're fighting a war that primarily would benefit Israel, and even though it helps us indirectly, I suppose, I just had some questions about how it was all going to work out. I didn't want to see America have to go to war. And the response from these people on Twitter were, if you criticize Trump on this, you're a grifter and you're disloyal. And
wow.
It was crazy. And you had these people coming out saying, I never once criticized President Trump since he came down that golden escalator, and I will remember you if you were disloyal now. It's like, wait a second. Like, you never once had questions. And now with the Epstein thing, you don't have any questions at all about how this has been handled. And really just this lack of good faith questioning, because I want the president to succeed in his agenda, which is why I'm asking the question, why I'm saying, let's handle this Epstein thing better. Let's be cautious about going to war in the Middle East. I do that because I want the president to succeed, not because I want to smear him in some way.
I will confess that the loyalty faction is a little bit unnerving, because it appears that they are willing to put, President Trump above reality in order to support him no matter what. And I only use that description of it because idolatry really is defined by anything that we put above reality. And so that's very concerning. So is it a done deal? I mean, look, I'm one of those people who I don't like to see, for instance, Congressman Thomas Massey from Kentucky, who has called out some of the aspects of the big, beautiful bill as well as other Trump policies and said this is not in keeping with the proper role of government. And he's being treated like, he's some kind of a rabid communist.
Right. And, Thomas Massey, I think there's a little bit of a distinction there, because Thomas Massey can be sort of a roadblock in getting some policy items put through. So I can understand the president's frustration with that. But for people like us who are just talking heads, we're just out here to kind of call it how we see it, to tweet out questions on Twitter and then be called a grifter, that seems really insulting to our intelligence. And you have the president even saying over this Epstein stuff, I don't want your support if you have questions about this. It's like, no, I think you should want our support because we elected you to do this job. And yeah, I think all is lost, though. I think because President Trump is not particularly ideological and he just likes to win, he does listen to our dissenting voices. It's us that have questions that are moving him on these issues, which is why we're seeing maybe a softening on the Epstein thing. Maybe they're going to talk to Ghislaine Maxwell to release some grand jury testimony or things like that. But it wasn't the bootlickers, Trump bootlickers, that got that done. It was us that got that done by calling him out and saying, Mr. President, like what you're doing, but we have some questions. You better shut up. And that's really, we are the ones that are enacting that policy, and it helps no one just to slavishly be devoted to a president who we all know is an imperfect man personally, anyways, right? Like us all.
So, Ethan, I'm curious as far as the people who pledged their loyalty to Trump. Is it a matter of we can make this happen without the support of the rest of the GOP or other conservatives? It just seems like this is a really weird time to be dividing that coalition, and it seems like the division comes down to those who want personality versus those who are following principle.
Right. And it's just bad politics for Republicans or conservatives to act like this, because the number one rule of politics is when your opponent is making a misstep, just stand there and point. The Democrats are floundering. They're shipping Hunter Biden around the country doing podcasts. Like they're absolutely floundering here. And instead of that, the Republicans are doing these circular firing squads on themselves. And I think honestly with these MAGA influencers, I think they have a personal brand as I am a Trump loyalist. That's who I am. That's why everyone follows me. And they're just trying to cultivate this image because they get paid, or they don't want the president to turn his eye of Sauron on them and suddenly start criticizing them. There was one influencer duo that posted a sort of pro-war neocon message to their Facebook from sort of the boomer neocon very pro-Israel contingent. And then they posted an anti-intervention message to their Twitter, which is hilarious. It just shows that it's all about creating this public image, and there's a financial incentive behind this. People make a lot of money off of X. But I don't really care what the reason behind it is. I think if you're in this space, you gotta call balls and strikes as you see them, and I won't hesitate to do that. President Trump or President Biden or whoever our next president is.
Well, you pretty much answered the next question, which was, did anybody have to change their tune in order to maintain their standing among the algorithm on social media or their monetization and so forth? And it sounds like, yeah, there were people who read the wind correctly and adjusted their course.
Yeah, and I know X is not like a good substitute for real life. I have to remind myself of that. And I think everybody out there should remember that X is not real life. However, these people do have millions of followers. They do have an impact. Their voices are heard, and it's worth talking about it because I think it can be a canary in the coal mine for certain problems within our political movement. And really, it's good to have dissenting voices, right? Everybody who's in this sort of Trump, GOP, MAGA coalition, we have different viewpoints on things, but we agreed on the 80-20 issue. We were on the 80% side of those, and that's why we won. And so we should continue to respect each other's differences on that and not hold grudges or gatekeep support. Let's work with each other on the issues we can work with and welcome each other back with grace when we decide we've made a mistake. Well,
and let's hear it for the dissenters too. Whether they're right or whether they're wrong, the dissenters will tell you the things that your friends will not tell you. So that's valuable, at least from that viewpoint. If I don't like to be criticized, but when someone is criticizing me, I like to know, is there some substance to what they're saying? Because they'll tell me if I need to improve.
Right. Of course. Those are the people that are moving the needle. Those are the people that are holding our leaders accountable. And accountability was a core tenet of the MAGA movement. And I think we need to apply that principle evenly.
Okay, again, we are talking with Ethan Watson. He's a Young Voices contributor and incoming O'Connor Fellow at the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at Arizona State University. By the way, congratulations on that, Ethan.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You can find me on X at ERWatson13 if you want to hear more of my stuff.
Fantastic. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Me too. Absolutely.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. This is our fourth and final segment today. Happy to welcome Anthony De Luca-Baratta back to the program. Anthony, it's only been a couple of weeks, but great to have you back. For those meeting you for the first time, take a moment to just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you for having me back on your show, Brian. So I'm a Young Voices contributor, started about a month ago. I also write for the Center for North American Prosperity and Security, which is the Washington, D.C. based branch of what is, in my completely unbiased opinion, Canada's best think tank, the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, where I think about Canada-US issues and really any issue of import, especially on the economic and defense side for the Canadian public policy scene. Most recently, I've been writing about housing, and it's an important issue, especially for young people. Canada has the unfortunate distinction of being one of the most unaffordable housing markets in the world. So I'm excited to talk to you about this important issue to people of my generation.
All right, I'm looking at an article you've written for the Toronto Sun about Canada's other supply management problem. And when we talk about supply management, I assume that could cover a lot of different areas.
Right. So many Canadians will know, and actually we've become sort of infamous for this internationally because it's such a trade irritant to many of our partners, including the United States. But Canada has a rather well-known supply management system for agricultural goods, where the federal government essentially distributes quotas to each province for the production of poultry, eggs, and dairy. And then essentially each individual farmer gets to purchase quotas from the government, which gives him or her permission to produce a certain number of goods. And this is all meant to control how much of each product is on the market to, of course, guarantee a minimum price. So most recently, Canadians have come around to realizing how bad it is for their wallets, honestly. A University of Manitoba study has found that Canadians pay $900 million a year more for groceries than they otherwise would because of this system, which is just a huge amount. And Canadians are getting tired of it. But as you say, we have another supply management problem. It's not called supply management, but in its effects, it is supply management. And that is, of course, land use regulations that make the construction of housing very difficult and sometimes impossible, such that the supply of housing cannot keep up with demand in Canada. And that is the basic economic reason that housing is so expensive here. So that is Canada's other supply management system. And frankly, its effects are even worse than the first one.
Just out of curiosity, what kind of costs do those planning rules impose? Is it environmental impact statements? Is it just, permits to build? I'm curious how that's justified on the government's part.
Right. So it's really all of the above. Most land use regulations are at the local level. They regulate things like how high of a building one is permitted to build. So there are, story limits. Yes, there are environmental compliance rules. There are rules that legislate, for example, that you have to have a certain number of parking spots per number of units built. There are density regulations. There are all kinds of regulations. And in terms of how much of a cost this imposes, first of all, I should say that even outside of Canada, study after study after study has demonstrated that the fewer land use regulations you have, the cheaper the cost of housing is in a given jurisdiction. This is extremely well established by literally dozens of studies. In Canada in particular, the C.D. Howe Institute took a look at this, and they determined that in 8 major metropolitan areas in Canada, including Ottawa-Gatineau, so that's the capital area, including Vancouver, the effects of land use regulations are to impose an extra average of $230,000 per house. In Vancouver, where the average price is $2 million, it's actually half. So if you bought an average priced house in Vancouver today, you would pay $1 million more than you otherwise would just because of land use regulations.
I mean, someone was just telling me about California and the housing costs there. And I think the thing was, if you want to build a house, it's $100,000 or more just for the environmental impact study or permit, to do it. So, okay, let's talk solutions here. Anthony, if I think you're doing a great job of identifying what the government is doing wrong. What do they need to do to address these supply problems?
Yeah, I mean, we need to get rid of the regulations. So it depends. It depends on which level of government you're talking about. At the local level, I think it's simple. Not housing, but land use codes need to be simplified. They need to be shortened. A lot of fat and red tape need to be cut. That's easier said than done. At the provincial and federal levels, those levels of government have to use the power of the purse and the bully pulpit to essentially force municipalities to build more. So in Canada, the Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre has a bill, which I believe is called the Build Homes, Not Red Tape or Not Bureaucracy Act or something along those lines. And in that bill, it's a very simple proposal. It essentially says to cities, you either accelerate the pace of housing construction or you're not getting federal dollars. So at the federal and by the way, the provincial governments could do the exact same thing. There are regulations at the federal and provincial levels which can be cut as well, but those frankly don't account for most of the problem. It's really at the local level where you see most of this issue. So bully pulpit from on high, cutting regulations from below. And by the way, for anybody who's skeptical that this can be done without compromising, other values like environmental quality or safety, you need only look at jurisdictions that actually have done this, or to be more specific, they haven't cut regulations. They were just never there in the first place, like Houston, Texas. So Houston is the quintessential example of this. I talk about it a little bit in my article. But Houston has virtually no land use regulations. And, the city looks perhaps a little bit funny from the perspective of someone who's used to living in a meticulously planned urban area. But frankly, the aesthetic weirdness and frankly, I'm not even convinced that it's really that bad. I mean, just go look at pictures. Houston looks like a perfectly lovely place to live. In places like Houston, housing prices are the average home price is $350,000. And it's not that demand isn't high in Houston. Lots of people want to live in Houston. It's a great place to live. There's been a net migration into Texas as a whole and into Houston specifically. And yet, housing is abundant and cheap. And that's because housing construction can keep up with housing demand. It's simple economics.
Why is it that people find it so hard, though, to trust the free market? You mentioned in your article the developers in Houston, they're as greedy as the developers in Toronto, but they're
right.
Constrained by competition rather than regulation.
What people are used to seeing is that every time a new house gets put up or every time a new apartment block gets put up, it costs a lot of money. And so understandably, without an understanding of the deeper economics, they're going to attribute this to greed. But of course, in a heavily regulated market where costs are so high, the only kind of housing worth building is expensive housing. So it's a little bit hard to see, but you have to trust not just the economic theory, you have to trust the data. Take a look at Houston, see how they do it down there. It works.
Well, and especially for the young people in Canada, you mentioned in your article, it feels hopeless at this point when you do the math of what it would take to even just, put aside a down payment for a home. Housing seems very affordable. So Canadians, I think, as you mentioned, have a right to be upset about paying too much for a carton of milk, too much for a home. Government needs to get out of the way.
Exactly. We need shovels in the ground. Yes, exactly.
For people who want to be more informed on this issue, are there any resources that you find particularly helpful?
Yeah, I mean, there's a great Cato Institute study, for instance, on this, a Heritage Foundation study, the C.D. Howe study that I mentioned. I forget what the titles are, but you can just Google them and find them pretty easily.
Okay. Well, thanks for your hard work on this issue as well. Again, we're talking with Anthony De Luca-Baratta. He's a contributor to the Center for North American Prosperity and Security, a project of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, as well as a Young Voices contributor. And for those who would like to find you on social media or otherwise follow your work, Anthony, where can they find you?
You can feel free to connect with me or follow me on LinkedIn or follow my work at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute website.
Very good. Thanks again for your time. Looking forward to our next chat.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Anytime.